Welcome back to the channel. I am the Humble Gamer. Make sure to put God first in everything that you do. With that being said, let's say our prayer. Dear Lord, thank you for this opportunity to do something to your glory. I ask that you bless this session, not for my benefit and good, but for the benefit and good of those who are watching. Amen. And we are back playing Sherlock Mysteries. I have to keep this game up because with games like this that require you to remember a lot of things or to put together different clues, if you go like 3 or 4 days without playing, you'll just forget. Well, you know what? I should say I will forget. So this is my second day in a row playing it. And to be honest, I've already forgotten some things, but I think we were in chapter 8. Yes. Okay. So I'm on chapter 9. I'm going to have to go back though and look at my notes, but yes, let's keep going.
The warehouse of Dutton Shipping is abuzz with carriages dropping off various cargoes and crates. We have to inquire with no fewer than 4 people before we're directed to Mrs. Wright, who walks the floor with a register and pen in hand.
"Excuse me, Mrs. Wright. We're sorry to interrupt your affairs here, but it's a matter of great importance."
She scarcely looks up from her work.
"The apologies are all mine, gentlemen. I really don't have time for a proper meeting. I've got to have all these containers accounted for within the hour."
Mr. Wiggins removes his hat and speaks with haste.
"Then we won't keep you but a moment longer, and get right to the point. We're investigating the death of a man named Theodore Watts."
Without so much as a glance, she continues checking off her paperwork and sidestepping to the next crate.
"Don't know any Theodores, gentlemen, living or deceased."
Wiggins presses his lips together, deep in thought.
"Strand Financial, ma'am. Does your company do any business with them?"
Again, without looking up.
"Dutton does business with 3/4 of London, Mr. Wiggins, but the name Strand isn't any account I know of."
The frustration shows on Wiggins' face.
"I don't suppose you know any members of the Hellfire Club, either?"
At the mention of the name Hellfire, Mrs. Wright stops dead in her tracks. The pen nearly fumbles to the floor as she straightens up and looks to us directly. Her face flushes crimson.
"I'm a proper Christian, thank you. I'd burn in hell before I kept acquaintances like those. Good day, gentlemen."
Without waiting for our response, Mrs. Wright sets off across the warehouse.
Okay. She mentioned Dutton Shipping, so I want to look that up. No, nothing. What about just Dutton? Oops. Nope. Okay. And that was Miss Wright. What does it say chapters of? Oh, I think I might have hit chapter 11 by accident. Okay, so this was chapter 9. Dutton Shipping. Mrs. Wright. So I'm just going to make a note of in chapter 9. Dutton Shipping. We'll say no business with Strand and Miss Wright. It's good enough for now. I feel like that could just be an entire red herring. And I'm going to keep pushing forward because it doesn't say anything about Miss Wright. It doesn't give me her first name. So if I need to come back to that later, I will. But for right now, let's just skip to the next. Well, not skip. Let's go to the next chapter.
The only name from Mr. Watts's list, accompanied by an address, 928 Liverpool Street, brings us to a 2-story brick house that has seen far better days. The second-story shutters dangle from a single nail, and nearly every visible window lies cracked and corroded. The lamp-posts at each corner stand unlit, casting the entrance in complete shadow. As we cautiously make our way up the small steps to the front door, the sound of laughter and singing sweeps across us. The door creaks open of its own accord, revealing the silhouette of a barely dressed, voluptuous young woman. You blokes look like doctors. You know, you're not allowed to touch us anymore, not since they did away with that contagious disease law. Mr. Wiggins clears his throat.
There wouldn't be a Richard Clark on the premises, perhaps abiding in the upper floor?
The girl cackles and snorts. Gentlemen, I've lost count of all the dicks that have come through here. But you know in our profession we don't often get to last names. With a smile, the tart slinks her way over to Wiggins and places her hand suggestively on his chest. But if you gents want to come in, we can use any surnames you like. You can be William Henry, the last King of England, if it's your pleasure. We bid the young woman good day and retreat down the steps, stumbling with haste.
Okay, Richard Clark, we're looking directory. Chapter 11. Okay, so he'll be in the next chapter. (928) Liverpool Street. Okay, so for chapter 10, can I see chapter 10 if I type here, or is it going to be one of those things like it was last time? Okay, I can still see it, I guess, because my notes are shorter. So 928 Liverpool Street, I think. That sounds like a brothel to me. And that's all we really need to know from that.
A plump chambermaid greets us, gives us a quick and somewhat cold once-over. On account of the upcoming celebration, the masters of the house are not taking guests. Come back after the 23rd. Without waiting for our reply, she motions us off, then shuts the door in our faces.
Richard and Eleanor Clark's house. Okay. Okay, so I can't see anything, so we'll start a new note. That was chapter 11. Richard, Eleanor, upcoming celebration, closed until the 23rd. Clark. I couldn't remember the name. Richard and Eleanor Clark. Okay, let's move on to chapter 12.
Upon arrival at the bank, we are escorted to the reading room, where we are met by Fred Hughes, approximately 45 years of age, close-cropped salt and peppered hair, an air of confidence in his manner. Hughes puts down the ledger before him and stands with a pleasant formality. "Good day, gentlemen. As I understand it, you're here in assistance to Scotland Yard. Anything I can do to help our fine gentleman in blue, consider me at your service." Motioning to the chairs before him, we remove our coats and take a seat.
"Theodore Watts, Mr. Hughes. Does the name ring a bell?"
We are both shocked by Mr. Hughes' quick response. "Watts? Of course, Theodore Watts and Nicholas Price, co-owners of Strand Financial. I don't know either of them personally, but their firm does moderate business in the banking district." Excited, Wiggins presses on.
"Have you ever met Mr. Watts in person?"
Hughes' demeanor is relaxed and genuinely confused. "As I just said, I don't know either of them personally. No, I've never met them, nor handled their accounts. If I recall with any accuracy, Barclays Bank held most of the notes. I'm sorry I can't be of more help, gentlemen." Wiggins rises and shakes Mr. Hughes's hand.
Thank you for your time.
As we take up our coats to leave, Wiggins turns and asks,
On a personal matter, if I may, Mr. Hughes, if I wanted to pledge the Hellfire Club, who would I see about that?
The confident energy vanishes from Mr. Hughes's face like the last rays of light vanishing at sunset. He leaps from his seat, snatches the ledger before him so fast he flips the book open, sending a dozen papers sprawling across the floor.
You should know better, Mr. Wiggins, mentioning those villains in my presence, in my place of employment, no less. Of all the beef-headed indiscretions, scandal can get a gentleman fired. I have no information of such matters, and bid you not call on me again.
Mr. Hughes storms off, leaving a handful of bankers staring at us with gaping mouths.
Okay, so we already, all the names that I've listed here, we've already investigated. And we know Barclays Bank came in with Strand Financial and was closing them down. So we know that already. But I don't know about Fred Hughes. It needs to be a little bit, I think, better system here. Is like when I click on something, it clicks on like the whole paragraph when I'm just trying to get one name. Okay, so Fred Hughes has already been. I want to check one thing. So Bank of England. Okay. So chapter 12. Fred Hughes. Bank of England. There's a typo too in his name in one of the paragraphs. Sometimes I wonder too. I'm like, should I contact the developer when I find like little minute errors, or would they not be concerned? I don't want to come across as someone who is I don't know what the correct word is here. Someone who is I'm really lost. I just don't want to think that I'm saying anything bad about their game, or just, trying to be nitpicky or anything like that. But in a game like this, where like reading is important, and also you could look up names, like a misspelled name might like actually hurt the gameplay if somebody's trying to look up the name and they see it's misspelled. But that name is in quite a few other places, so I'm sure it's okay.
We arrive at Mr. Nicholas Price's house to falling brick debris and chunks of soot. After Wiggins gives a shout, a middle-aged chimney sweep, black as pitch, bobs his head over the edge of the roof.
Sorry, Governor. You didn't get the word. The old chap's been admitted to the hospital.
Wiggins throws his hand up to his brow to get a better look at the informant.
Which hospital, sir?
Couldn't help you there.
The sweep tips his hat and then disappears from view.
Okay. Nicholas Price admitted to hospital. And if I'm not mistaken, that's the co-owner of Strand Financial. Should I write that there? Co-owner, Strand Financial? Just in case I forget. Because I'm not sure when's the next time I'll get a chance to play. I don't know if you guys noticed that sometimes when I play these games, I'll play them, for like maybe a couple of days, and then I may not pick it up again for like a week or maybe 2 weeks. And then I have to try to remember everything. In a game like this, where it is definitely important to remember what's going on, I think I better leave myself as many great notes as I possibly can.
The amphitheater bustles with circus performers moving about the grounds, preparing for the night's show. It doesn't take long to find the gargantuan bearded Russian standing at the center of a crowd. Towering over the tallest man present by a good foot, Nanak proceeds to pulverize blocks of ice. The giant holds them single-handedly and simply squeezes them until they explode into 1,000 pieces. After the display of uncanny strength, we look at each other and nod. Clearly the Russian meets the physical characteristics of our murderer. Alas, our hopes are short-lived when we speak to Nanok's English interpreter and manager, a man with blazing red hair flowing beneath a tattered top hat and wearing a gold-tasseled vest 3 times too small. "Nano can crush 3 men's necks with one hand with ease. But I am afraid, gentlemen, he has been training from noon until 9 p.m. every day this week." The alibi, confirmed by other performers, eliminates our Russian visitor as a possible suspect.
They could be lying. Everybody could be covering for him. But he's not even in here. But I'm going to make a note of it anyway. But I have a feeling that they are telling the truth there. That's chapter 14. Physical prowess, that should be enough to let me know. But alibi confirmed by performers. That should be good enough, because I think they're letting us know right there that it's not him.
We arrive at Barclays just before closing. The clerk ushers us out, telling us to return on the morrow, but just as we reach the door, an executive of a bank, overhearing the situation, intervenes.
"Did you say Sherlock Holmes? The Sherlock Holmes?"
Wiggins snorts towards the clerk.
"Indeed I did. We have just a few questions regarding an open case of the yard."
In moments we find ourselves sitting in a private room drinking tea with Mr. Oliver.
"Strand Financial."
Wiggins' tone is direct and inquisitive. Mr. Oliver doesn't even bother to withdraw a ledger. Instead, he sits back and drinks.
"Tragic. Just tragic. It's events like this that make banking an all-around muddle at times."
We glance at each other, surprised at Mr. Oliver's blasé attitude. Wiggins looks back to the executive with a raised brow.
"That's a fine way to look at the murder of a man."
Mr. Oliver lurches forward, spilling half his tea.
"Murder? Good God, man, what are you going on about?"
When Wiggins catches the executive up, he leans back in his chair, his face awash in worry.
"Oh, this is most unfortunate. Everything will be much more complicated now. You see, gentlemen, Strand Financial held considerable notes from Barclays, many guaranteed outside of the company by Mr. Watts himself. We stopped the clock on Mr. Watts and the company over a month ago."
Wiggins sets down his tea.
"Are you saying that Mr. Watts owed Barclays money?"
"Yes, I thought I just made that abundantly clear. He owed the bank a considerable debt. Even after the liquidation of Strand Financial's assets at auction, the sum he'll be, or would have been, personally responsible for was more than many make in a lifetime. Though now that seems wholly irrelevant. I should have known something was afoot when we couldn't reach him these past few days."
Let's try Oliver. Okay, none of these are the Oliver that we're looking for. So we'll do another note here, chapter 15. Mr. Oliver, bank executive at Barclays, right? Didn't know about Watts' death. And Watts owes bank a lot of money. Where it says debt, and debt can be more than just money, but that's good enough. I'm not going to get very nitpicky. And he couldn't reach him for 3 days, I think he said, for the past few days. But I think we already knew that he was Mr. Watts couldn't be found for the last few days, so.
Our knock on the door calls forth a woman far removed from the chambermaid attire of Watts's residence, a young, dishevelled girl, more akin to a factory worker than the loyal servant of a gentleman's household. Her throat bulges beneath widening eyes as she struggles to swallow at seeing us once again. Mr. Wiggins swiftly takes the initiative. "Miss White, I couldn't help but notice you watching us from afar earlier today. Your manner gave the distinct impression you had something more to say. May we come in?" Retreating into the hall beyond the door, Miss White sways her arm behind us, beckoning us to enter.
"Of course, Constable."
Wiggins corrects the young lady of our affiliations, then takes a stool beside her in the kitchen. Rain drips from the ceiling, and enough draughts blow through the house to sail a ship across the channel 12 times over. The girl sinks into herself, looking at us from the corner of her eyes.
"I don't mean to get the Watts in trouble. They're fine people, decent people."
Wiggins drops his hat onto the table. "Of course, we're not here to defame the deceased, Miss White. Our intention is only justice for Mr. Theodore Watts. Now, tell us, was there an error in Mrs. Watts's account of events?" Her young frame springs forward, exploding like a spring coiled one too many times.
"No, of course not. Mrs. Watts tells it straight."
Her eyes slide away from us.
"Oh, for God's sake, girl, tell us!"
"It's like this,"
she says softly.
"November the 6th, the day before Mr. Theodore disappeared, a strange man came to the house."
With pen in hand, Wiggins asks with a single raised eyebrow.
"His name?"
"Didn't give it, sir. Not that I heard, anyway."
She closes her eyes in concentration.
"He was a younger man than you, if you'll pardon the observation. Handsome, with dark brows, a thin moustache, and well-cut beard. He had a smile that charmed and spoke of something dreadful all at the same time."
Suddenly opening her eyes, she rushes to get up, but Wiggin bars her way with an outstretched hand, convincing her to remain seated.
"Please, go on, Miss White. What did the man do during his visit?"
"He didn't hardly do anything. Mr. Theodore took him right into the study and they got to talking. Mr. Watts dismissed me right off, but the door to the study doesn't latch proper, and I couldn't help but linger."
"Did you hear what they discussed?"
Wiggins asked, leaning closer to the nervous young woman.
"Bits and pieces, as best I can recollect. The stranger was very hot at Mr. Theodore. Something about using information on his own was strictly against club rules, as he put it. His face turned devilish something awful, talking about some papers. The stranger kept going on about how very hard they were to get, and Mr. Theodore's taking and using of them was inexcusable."
"And how did Mr. Watts take this? Was he angry?"
"Oh, no, sir. He spoke with an even softer voice. He apologized for his actions with sincerity. He pleaded about being ruined, losing his business, the house, jeopardizing Mrs. Watts's livelihood even. But the stranger didn't seem to care. He told Mr. Theodore to abandon any idea he had of continuing his scheme for individual gain, and to that end, as punishment for his treasonous crime, he had given Mr. Watts's identity to his target."
Wiggins looks straight to the girl's blue eyes.
"Please, tell me the stranger mentioned Mr. Watts's target by name."
Miss White shifts in her seat, placing her hands on her lap.
"They started speaking so soft. The only other thing I heard was the stranger telling Mr. Theodore he had come as a courtesy, and that maybe he could settle it shallow, or make time to pack up his wife and affairs and be off before the piper came to be paid."
Pushing her bangs away from her eyes, Miss White looks at us with furrowed brow.
"I couldn't make heads or tails of that last part, but that's what I heard."
Wiggins collects his things and we make our way to the front door.
"You've been very helpful, Miss White. Thank you for your time."
Okay, there's a lot of information in that particular chapter. Chapter 16. So now we know that Watts was blackmailing someone. And he was a member of the Hellfire Club. He was blackmailing someone, and another member gave his target his identity. gave him time to get away. That really helped us. That really helped us. That gave us a lot of information.
We're met at the door by a freshly shaven man of such youthful appearance he could pass for a student at London University.
We're looking for a Mr. Lucas Massey.
How can I help you? He asks, struggling to finish a tie about his neck while holding the door with one foot. Wiggins squints.
Mr. Massey of Strand Financial.
As of late, Strand Financial. Mr. Massey turns and retreats into his home, raising his voice to compensate. Currently unemployed, as it were, preparing at this moment for a review at a new institution. Please, come in while I finish. Now, who are you, and how can I be of service? We deliver our introductions and reasons for the visit as Mr. Massey dances from one room to the next, putting himself straight. When we reach the murder of Theodore Watts, a bottle of aftershave shatters against the floor. No, don't say such things, gentlemen. Please, tell me there is a significant margin of error.
I'm afraid not.
With a dazed look in his eye, Mr. Massey withdraws a bottle of whiskey and a glass from the cupboard. He mumbles while pouring.
Oh, lad, what have you gone and done?
Wiggins immediately perks up.
Come again? You believe Mr. Watts somehow precipitated his own demise?
Massey drops into a lounge chair. Getting the spike, he squeezes the glass to white knuckles.
That damned Hellfire Club, without reserve, I assure you.
I don't quite follow. Do you mean to say members of the Hellfire Club have been harassing Mr. Watts?
No, you've got it all wrong. Watts was a member, you see, or at least so I gathered.
We move closer, waiting for the details Wiggins has provoked.
As you surely know, I've been in Theo's employ these past years. He was quite a solid character until only recently. A few months ago, he mentioned an invitation to attend a Hellfire Club party. Ever since that night, he wouldn't shut up about them. Not speaking in detail about their affairs, mind you, but the pleasure, excitement, and later on success that surrounded them.
Success?
The particulars escape me. I can only say Theo became completely unpredictable and reckless with his finances, with the company's finances. It was quite the sailing vessel at sea, one minute plunging to the depths of despair, quarrelling about every dollar, lamenting every bill, and then the next, riding the high crest, spending money without care.
Was that the nature of your falling out?
Indeed, gentlemen, I warned him. Whatever he was up to was a serious fopper, clouding his judgment, so much so he was putting himself, his wife Catherine, and the entire company at risk. He became so damned stubborn, angry, said he can use his connections to get money fast. Well, what good is a second if you ignore their advice in all matters? But for the love of me, I've never thought it was as malignant as to lead to murder. How bloody awful!
Wiggins looks deep into Lucas's vibrant, innocent eyes as he continues.
So there was bad blood between you, forcing you out of your employment?
Hardly, gentlemen. Theo was a friend. As impulsive and scattered as he became, an able man can always find another employer. In fact, I reached out to him just over a week ago, November the 3rd, if memory serves.
We look to Mr. Massey in utter surprise, one of the last people to have seen the victim alive.
Our conversation was trivial. I only remember it because he acted so damn odd, sweating as if he'd ran from Lambeth to London Bridge. His attention completely preoccupied with meeting a new client at Blackwell Station later that afternoon. It was supposed to solve his financial problems somehow. I was glad to hear that. Strand needed money, and soon.
Mr. Wiggins takes a deep breath, churning the interview in his mind's eye.
One last question, if you please, Mr. Massey. You mentioned an invite to the Hellfire Club. Do you know who put forth the invitation?
It's unknown to me, gentlemen. The only name I can give for the whole affair is Ashmore, for whatever it's worth, for I don't even know who it is, only that I overheard Theo speak the name a number of times in passing since his descent began.
Okay, so we know that's Samuel Ashmore. So I can't see it. Okay, so we'll do another note. That was chapter 17, I think. Lucas Massey trying to think there what I need to put down. And that word I was looking for in it earlier was denigrate. It just came to me. I don't want to denigrate anybody's game. I knew it would get there. It just popped to my head. Lucas Massey. He warned Watts being reckless. What about Watts gambling? And I'll put up down with finances. And then put Samuel Ashmore invite to Hellfire Club. That should be good enough. We might actually get through this. In this video. Or maybe not. So he's supposed to meet someone at Blackwell Station. Oh, I forgot that. Meet someone at Blackwell Station. Finances solved is good enough. We're going to put like financial problem solved, but there's only so much you can do and still see, so I don't want to be careful. Look at there. We've got Samuel Ashmore's estate coming up. All right, now we are at Sherlock Holmes' house.
Mr. Wiggins has a nervous air about him as we cross Baker Street, headed to the door of 221B.
Mr. Holmes pays us good money for gathering information for him. Maybe we should continue on our own before bothering him.
Before we can decide the matter, the door opens before us, revealing an upbeat Dr. Watson. "Ah, gentlemen, I was just heading out to see a patient. Mr. Holmes is in the parlour." We tip our hats to John and shortly find Mr. Holmes sitting cross-legged in the middle of the parlour floor. Burning incense of the Orient, protruding from small brass bowls, surround him. The room is awash with rare odours. "Have you concluded the case of Mr. Watts already, gentlemen?" Holmes asks without opening his eyes.
"Concluded?"
Mr. Wiggins barks, pulling nervously on the collar of his shirt.
"Sir, we haven't but started."
Holmes opens his eyes and waves his hand before him, swirling the thin streams of smoke about him. "Meditation, my good men. It does wonders for the mind. I highly recommend it." With a sudden burst of movement, Holmes leaps up and moves across the parlour to a bookshelf, examining the contents with one hand to his chin. "Blood-tinged bowels, headache, kidney failure, death, the bitter apple, Citrullus colocynthus."
"What's that now? Mr. Watts was strangled, Mr. Holmes, not poisoned."
Holmes looks to us completely vexed, then in an instant his face flushes with recognition.
"Mr. Watts, of course, yes. One of Gregory's men stopped by and gave me the particulars.
Seems straightforward enough, gentlemen. Visit all the people that come before you, pay attention to the details, and deduce if they were a part of the crime. Don't forget locations can sometimes reveal more about a person or event than people themselves, so take note of any locations of relevance. Most certainly the 4 names on Mr. Watts's list, Ebenezer Sallow, Janet Wright, Richard Clark, and Fred Hughes, have some bearing on the case." Before we get a word in further, Holmes drops into a chair with one of the books from the shelves, spouting more Latin. Wiggins turns and heads towards the front door.
"We might as well have at it. We'll not get anything else from him when he's focused like this."
"Oh, Mr. Wiggins," Holmes calls out, "do send word as the case progresses. I'll keep an eye on your progress, and we'll arrange a meeting at its conclusion."
Well, we see Fred Hughes now. We couldn't look up Hughes earlier, so can we do this with this? Okay, so that was just chapter 12. And Dr. Watson. He's already been investigated. I think this is a very important paragraph. I've been keeping notes about locations and things of that nature, but just in case I get to the end and I'm not sure, like I'm still wondering what's going on, I might want to go back and look at all these people's places and locations. Oh, you can't paste. So I'll just put names and locations. 4. Fred Hughes, Ebenezer, Sallow. I know it was Janet something. Janet Wright and Richard Clark. Okay.
The paintings and sculptures that clutter the foyer of Ashmore's Manor speak to a family of considerable wealth.
Ashmores want for nothing.
The deep voice pulls our attention to the sweeping carpeted steps.
We have been blessed with a sizable fortune, sprung forth from the bosom of the church itself.
Samuel Ashmore glides down the steps with elegance and poise, one black silk-gloved hand grasping the rail, the other brandishing an ebony cane of high polish. His sharp moustache and triangular beard, groomed to the impeccable standards of high society vanity. His flowing auburn locks and strong jawlines, hallmarks of the naturally handsome. But something in his eyes, their darkness perhaps, or slightly deep-set nature, creates an impression of all-fired wickedness about him.
Ironic, isn't it?
How's that, sir?
That the public face of the Hellfire Society would be built around the very thing we openly mock.
As you say, sir. If we may, I'd like to ask you a few questions about... Ashmore turns and walks off towards an archway in the rear of the foyer, before Wiggins can finish.
This way, gentlemen. I make it a policy never to speak to the police sober. The conversations are simply too much of a bore.
He laughs, fully amused by his own cleverness.
We're not the police, sir.
A clanking of glass rings out as Ashmore haphazardly pours 3 old fashions with brandy.
Inspectors of the yard, constables of the law, agents of the court, lackeys of the great Sherlock Holmes. No offense intended, gentlemen.
He hands each of us a glass and raises his own above his head.
Here's to cats of a different colour.
Indeed, and none taken, of course, Mr. Ashmore. He places his glass of liquor on an end table. Since you seem to know who we are without any introduction, I must also assume you know why we're here. Slumping down in a high-back, Gothic-style garnet chair, Ashmore throws one leg over its arm and swirls the brandy in his glass.
This Theodore Walsh fellow found himself on the wrong side of a murder. Well, gentlemen, I'm sorry to say I have no affiliation to the man. None whatsoever.
What's Theodore Watts?
As you say.
I don't suppose you'd be able to furnish us with a list of members to your group? Ashmore belly laughs.
Gentlemen, a secret society that divulges its membership shows no understanding of the word to which it subscribes.
Ashmore rises from his seat and approaches.
But I will tell you this. If you were to see a genuine list of our members, you would be shocked and amazed. Some of England's most notable families are among us.
Wiggins nods. I do not doubt it for a minute, sir. Ashmore leans forward and places his hand on Wiggins's shoulder.
I hate to be the bearer of bad news, my friends, but the truth is, the Hellfire community is really just a gathering of wealthy men and women bored with the conventions of dogma. There is not a ripper among us. Of this I assure you.
Wiggins looks around the study. Unlike the foyer, the art of the study has a macabre tone. Paintings of devils and witches, a sculpture of a hanged man, more than one medieval bladed weapon. Ashmore finishes his drink in a fast gulp and narrows his eyes.
I see you are unconvinced. Then there is really only one means to exonerate our organization. Liverfish, gentlemen.
We both respond simultaneously. Liverfish?
Indeed.
Ashmore scribbles an address on a piece of parchment and hands it over to Wiggins.
The word is the password of entry. The address I give you here is our next meeting. A masquerade ball. Come in costume and enjoy the festivities, or come as you are to watch. Either way, you will see with your own eyes our true benevolent ways.
I noticed too, it says Wiggins nods. I do not doubt it. It said in the audio, I do not doubt it for a minute as opposed to a moment, which is written here. Again, I don't think that matters, but just pointed out because I noticed. I think I've become more observant playing this game. I can't see it. Okay, new note. Samuel Ashmore, password to Hellfire Club Ball Liverfish. It would be kind of cool there too, with the new chapters, if you investigated, like for the liverfish, instead of it just being a new chapter, that you had to collect the password to put into the new chapter. I think that would be like really cool for this game.
"999 Seymour Street is a private estate on the northern border of London proper, just east of Regent Park. Years of neglect shroud the property in weeds and vines. If not for the menacingly large servant at the door bearing the beaked mask of a plague doctor, one would assume the estate abandoned. "Liverfish," Wiggins exclaims at our approach. The servant bows, unravels a chain about the door latch, and pushes it open, revealing a pitch-black hall. A muffled voice of tin speaks out.
"Through the veil of consciousness, gentlemen, a world of dreams await."
Summoning our courage, we enter into the darkness, arms reaching blindly before us, startling when the door slams and locks behind us. Only the faint sound of violins fortifies us to press on. Pushing through a series of heavy black velvet curtain, our eyes are finally assaulted by a concert of blazing chandeliers and scores of dancers in costumes. Within moments, a bare-chested man behind a fox mask presses intimately behind us.
Gentlemen, for a moment I thought you'd not show.
"Well, it is our job to show. Samuel Ashmore, I presume?"
The grin just peeking out beneath the mask is unmistakable.
Ah, excellent. Then let us waste no time and reveal the true face of the Hellfire Society.
Leaping atop the base of a Greek statue depicting a naked woman in the most immodest pose, Ashmore throws his cane aloft and shouts until the music breaks and the dancing stops.
Bring out the Virgin's blood. It's time at last to pay our Lord respect. Camille Saint-Saëns! Camille Saint-Saëns!
The unseen musicians take up again, sweeping the screeching melody of Danse Macabre over every soul present. We watch as with shouts of glee a large jug of red liquid passes from one person to the next. Their sips are not dainty and measured, but wild and without care. Crimson pours from their lips, down their chests, across their costumes, pooling on the floor. A most animalistic scene if ever there was one. Ashmore himself takes a tremendous swig of the elixir before passing it to Wiggins, who only sniffs and mumbles,
"Merlot, if I'm not mistaken."
Oh, where's your imagination, gentlemen? Now you see the primary prerequisite for membership. There is but one other.
We pause in eager anticipation. Ashmore in turn undresses, standing before us stark naked save his fox head mask. Nearly everyone present follows suit, and the dancing commences once again. Unimpressed, Wiggins cautiously makes his way around the participants and approaches a door by which a handful of caped men have entered since we arrived, but not one has exited. As he reaches for the doorknob, a cane smacks his hand. Mr. Ashmore pushes between us, bringing with him a woman under each arm wearing nothing more than a few strands of black beads and colourful butterfly masks.
I would warn you, gentlemen, for your own safety. There are some doors that, once opened, can never be returned from.
Wiggins nods to Mr. Ashmore and the women.
Indeed. Come on, we've seen enough.
We leave the estate, carried by the echoing laughter of Samuel Ashmore and sharp violin strings.
Okay, chapter 20. We'll call it the imagination ball. Like they're not what's the word for it? All these things that you think that they're doing, they're not really doing. They're just kind of having fun and they're bored. So it's imagination ball. And we'll say, but Samuel Ashmore does have a cane. I missed that in the last, I remember it, but didn't write it down. Samuel Ashmore has a cane, so he could be favoring his leg as well. But if all of this stuff, though, is so, if all of this stuff is so benign, if you will, they do have some information on it, because that's what Mr. Watts was using to blackmail another one of the members. So they must be doing something. So let's start chapter 21.
It's unlikely to bear fruit, coming to the rail for clues days after the fact, but as Mr. Holmes always says, the detective's greatest tool is an imagination that leaves no stone unturned until all the facts that can be had are had. Blackwell proves as time-consuming and as uneventful as Wiggins predicted, until the last interview of the day, a young porter named Thomas. I couldn't tell you the day for certain, but it's just a few days back. November the 4th was by my best guess. There was a giant of a fellow, stood at the end of the station holding a large briefcase, stood there like a statue, hours on end. Can you describe him?
Long coat and hat, stood in the shadows, couldn't hardly get a good look at him, not that I wanted to or tried. I tend to avoid the giant types on account of my smaller stature, and that bloke was all over red. No thanks, I kept my distance the entire time he was standing there. Wiggins lifts his hat and runs his fingers through his hair.
Not much of a lead.
The lad throws up one hand. Hold on, you didn't let me get to the best part. A bit after break, I look back and the giant statue's finally gone, but his briefcase is still there. Now, people lose their luggage all the time on the rail, but I've never seen anyone leave their one sack they've been holding onto nearly all day long.
That is peculiar.
I'll say, and when I went over to collect the lost item, I nearly get ploughed over by another bloke sweating like a horse and all out of breath. Before I can get a word in, he grabs the bag and takes off. Didn't even notice the... The young man suddenly stops and swallows hard. Wiggin raises a brow.
Go on, lad. What did the gentleman not notice?
Glowing, the porter looks around nervously. It's not like I stole it, sir. I wouldn't have to give it back to the station, would I? We both shake our heads no, goading the young man to continue. £100 banknote, sir. Slipped straight out of the case. Burn me if the case wasn't stuffed with them. I did try to call the man back, honestly, but he didn't slow down in the slightest. While young Thomas didn't get a look at the giant who left the case, he did get a thorough glance at the second man who took the case, and describes Mr. Theodore Watts, almost to the letter.
Okay. Chapter 21. Watts, blackmail victim plays. I should have been keeping better notes of the days too, because people have been saying days. So we'll say November 4th for that one. Because I if I'm not mistaken, let's go back to Lucas Massey. Wasn't he say November 3rd he tried to contact him and he couldn't get in contact with him? Let me see. Yes. In fact, I reached out to him just over a week ago, November the 3rd. And what chapter was this? 17. November 3rd. So now we just need to know who this giant is. More than likely, it's probably not a security guard. It says, and that bloke was all over red. Long coat and hat. Let's go to the menu. I really don't want to click solve the case because it says something like once you start, you can't stop. And I need to figure out who the giant is. Hold on a second. Let me go back to my notes from the very beginning. Mr. Peter Pete, maybe? Which chapter was that? Chapter 6? Ah, Mr. Peter Pete, just in time. My appetite was beginning to turn. A large, dark man. Leathered faced and deep set eyes. Could be Mr. Peter Pete. Because there was also Nanak. And then there was a couple of people later on who were giant sized as well. Okay. Make sure there's no more clues. Got all the clues. Anything else on the newspaper? Just checking over some things. Okay, so let's go back to our notes, and I know there was something from Ebenezer Sallow, Janet Wright, Richard Clark, Fred Hughes. So we already know Ebenezer Sallow and Mr. Peter Pete. So I think that's something. And Janet Wright. Who's Janet Wright? Let's go back. Dutton Shipping. I'm just taking a little time to read this over, guys. Let me see if Janet Wright comes up with anything else. It's just this. Okay. See, she seems to know something, but it doesn't tell us anything. Okay, Fred Hughes. I think we made a note for Fred Hughes. Bank of England. He's making it harder for them because of what happened. So we know that. And what was the last name? Richard Clark. I remember that they're having their Jubilee anniversary. We'll try Clark Richard. Is it just that? Okay, there's nothing to do. Okay. It said make note of their locations as well, but it doesn't really say what their location is. And it doesn't tell me how those connect, so I don't know how much the map of London is supposed to help me there. So let's go to menu. Let's go to solve the case. Are you ready to solve the case of the man who died twice? Answer a series of questions and determine if your proposed theory is correct. But be careful, once you begin the questioning phase, you will not be able to visit any new locations or discover any additional clues. Okay, I'll give it a shot. Let me warn you before I even start that I'm not holding up high hopes. Like, I thought that with all the information that I would get from 21 chapters, I would be able to put it together, but I still don't really have a good idea at all. So bear with me, everyone. And thank you in advance. Who killed Theodore Watts? I'm going to say Peter Pete. Who was the killer acting on behalf of? See, I would think that it would be Samuel Ashmore, but it could definitely be Catherine Watts. No, because the person who came was like a member of the club. Who's Kevin Brooke? Oh, that was Abigail Brooks' father. So no, it's not him. Definitely not Lucas Massey, Kevin Brooke, not Peter Pete, obviously, not Theodore Watts. Samuel Ashmore, Jacob Edwards. Not Ebenezer. It could be Ebenezer Sallow. Let me go back to the chapters. Lavinia White's house. Go to Jacob Edwards. So it's somebody younger. Oh, was he the caretaker? Yeah, so it's definitely not him. So it has to be Samuel Ashmore, right? Who was Theodore Watts protecting by faking his first death? His wife, definitely. Catherine Watts. Why was his shovel broken in half? Broken from death blow to Mr. Watts. Broken while digging graves. Let me go back. I remember the broken shovel as a clue. Okay. I want to check the clues again. Let me look at this torn paper. Oh, wait. This is that paper with... This has the names that Sherlock was mentioning. Ebenezer Sallow is crossed out. Ooh, can I go back? Because now I'm thinking that that Peter Pete was acting on behalf of Ebenezer Sallow. Oh, so Mr. Clark's name was okay. Okay, okay. So all right. Okay, let me go to my menu and go to solve the case. Can I go back? No, I need to go back. Oh man, you can't go back. Whoa, I feel like I missed some chapters here. Now I'm thinking that Richard Clark was cheating on his wife. And so he was the one. Yes. Oh, there should be a way for you to go back on these questions. Where did I want to go? I wanted to go to Abigail, this Brooks residence. He died in prison shortly after his transport to Australia. Oh man, I wish I would have gotten the chance to go back and do some more.
We arrive at the Criterion Bar precisely at 4 p.m., just as previously instructed by Sherlock Holmes. London's affluent crowd the establishment, making it difficult to find our way to the back of the main room, where Holmes and Watson sit already enjoying a pint. "Ah, Mr. Wiggins, punctual as ever," exclaims Holmes. "Watson and I were just discussing the preliminaries to a new case that is so muddled and knotted it will surely demand each and every one of our keen perceptions to crack." Mr. Wiggins looks dumbfounded. "But, Mr. Holmes, we've not concluded our current case. Poor Mr. Watts deserves justice." A familiar voice barks out from behind. "Not concluded the case? Now what the devil did you summon me here for, Holmes? I've got a jail cell overflowing and a backlog of court filings a mile high." Holmes strikes a match to his pipe and motions for Inspector Gregory to sit down. "The intentions of my colleague's words were that he had not brought the conclusion to your attention, Inspector, which is precisely why you were summoned, as you will see in but a moment, to this precise spot and time." Holmes puffs on his pipe, turning to Mr. Wiggins. "If I may." Fumbling to sit down, Mr. Wiggins looks to the rest of us a bit perplexed. "But, Mr. Holmes, we haven't given you but a handful of the facts. How can you possibly—" An abrupt cough from Mr. Watson silences the confused neophyte detective. With a nod, he corrects his line. "Excuse me, Mr. Holmes. Please, go ahead." Holmes grins warmly. The case of Mr. Theodore Watts is more complex in appearance than actualities, as no sane man would take on the task of exhuming the body of a man accidentally buried in his place. The first body must have been buried with Mr. Watts's direct endorsement, and more to the point, his task at digging up the body would only come upon his need to retrieve something from the casket. If we discover Mr. Watts's motivation for his actions and the nature of the item he sought, the identity of the murderer will surely follow. To unravel the riddle before us, we need look no further than the daily papers to begin. Strand Financial, Mr. Watts's speculation company, liquidated. All assets seized. His partner, Mr. Nicholas Price, admitted to hospital for collapse of nerves, not unreasonable for a life of hard work lost on a single roll of the dice. "Roll of the dice, Mr. Holmes?" Wiggins asked with a raised brow. The particulars are of little importance, though I suspect, as both the paper and Mr. Price alludes to, a real estate deal regarding the expansion of the courts. A most risky, overpriced purchase of otherwise useless land, taking up on rumour and hope. The gamblings of a man overcome with debt, or more plainly put, a man of desperation. Where a desperate man alone is a danger to himself, a desperate man belonging to a group of the underworld is a danger to everyone around him. "The Hellfire Club!" exclaims Inspector Gregory. "The Hellfire Club, indeed," nods Mr. Holmes. "A band of educated, wealthy men, willing to do whatever is called for to maintain their position and lifestyle. I've had more than one run-in with members of the so-called Hellfire Club. While I attest most are ignorant to their participations, those among their commanding ranks are the very definition of deplorable." Wiggins leans on the table with both arms, looking to Holmes with intense, narrowed eyes.
Then the brooch from the assailant, Mr. Holmes. Surely someone from the Hellfire Club killed Mr. Watts.
You're first of only 2 blunders, Mr. Wiggins, for you deduced that the brooch was torn from murderer during a struggle, but there was no fabric caught in the clasp, nor was the clasp broken. To be pulled free from the clothing without signs of such is a far stretch indeed. As you may have learned from Lucas Massey, Watts himself had thrown in with Samuel Ashmore and his ilk. No, the brooch was not the assailant's, but Mr. Watts's own, without a doubt buried with the body, along with the book and papers, then dropped sometime after the struggle of Mr. Watts's final moments.
But the papers found at the grave were decades old. A paper clipping and some old tattered prison documents. What possible relevance could they have had today? Surely they held no intrinsic value.
Holmes puffs on his pipe and grins. To you or I, no, but to the other parties involved, I would say the book and papers would be quite invaluable. Don't you see, gentlemen? The value has already been established. Mr. Watts's young chambermaid, Lavinia White, spoke of a strange visitor who was insulted by Mr. Watts's theft of the materials. The description of the stranger could not have painted a more vivid picture of Mr. Samuel Ashmore, a confidant of Mr. Watts already established by Mr. Massey. One hardly need make a leap of deduction. The public head of the Hellfire Club, a group suspected of keeping vast records of secrets against London's high society, arrives unannounced and chastises its member for taking the club's documents. Fragments of said documents found at the scene of a murder which, through the use of the London Directory, leads to the only living relative of a man imprisoned, Miss Abigail Brooke, the daughter who still swears all these years later of her father's innocence, falsely sentenced by Ebenezer Sallow, a woman who, more than offering her testimony, vows to documented proof of Sallow's wrongdoing.
Wiggins leans back in his seat. Blackmail.
Holmes raises a single brow. Mr. Watts, an overextended, desperate man and member of the Hellfire Club, steals a collection of documents containing the secrets of a handful of men and women of wealth or position who have incriminated themselves in a manner to which they prefer to pay quiet sums under the table rather than bring their indiscretions to light. The inspector grimaces and waves his hand dismissively before him.
Theories, Mr. Holmes. I do hope you have not brought me all the way down here for idle conjecture.
Holmes pulls his pipe from his mouth and looks at the inspector. One can hardly gather evidence of a crime that is never reported, Inspector. Blackmail is often the shrewdest form of coercion. However, in this case our story is far from over. Remember, Mr. Massey spoke of his longtime friend and employer as nervously distracted by a later appointment at Blackwall Station. And, following up, we discover a man of extraordinary size, who waits patiently, then leaves a bag, presumably filled with banknotes, intercepted by another party. Lowering his head along his half-empty pint glass so that his eye appears 5 times its normal size, Holmes continues with increased enthusiasm. And let us not forget, gentlemen, only one name of the 4 on Mr. Watts's list was crossed out, Ebenezer Sallow. As a thing crossed out infers it is no longer needed, we can deduce Mr. Watts was set out to blackmail his victim and was successful. With this assumption in place, we need only look for anyone in the victim's employ, loyal enough to make delivery of the demanded funds while fitting the description given by the porter. Luckily there are not many giants roaming London proper.
That aboriginal fellow, Peter Pete, cries Wiggins.
It's not adding up, Holmes, growls the inspector. If Watts took a receipt of a considerable blackmail payment, why disappear?
Please keep up, Inspector. As I noted earlier, Lavinia White said that Mr. Ashmore gave up Watts to Mr. Sallow as punishment. Mr. Watts knew it was only a matter of time before Sallow lashed out. Not wanting any harm to befall his wife, his only option was to disappear. Reviewing his journal, Wiggins touches his pen to his tongue.
Mr. Watts's death would have made Mr. Sallow's revenge a moot point. But I don't understand. If everything had gone according to plan, why in the devil did he return to Bunhill burial grounds?
Dates, my good man. The devil is in the details. Watts was buried on November 10th. On the 12th, his wife encountered Mr. Pete in her home.
Wiggins nods. Mr. Sallow didn't fall for Watts's ruse or didn't care. It was intent to recover the documents at any cost.
A cost Mr. Watts was unwilling to pay. Perhaps he intended to bargain further, using them again as leverage, or offer them up to Mr. Sallow to make amends, or turn them over to you, Inspector. At this point we will never know. but somehow Mr. Pete managed to track Mr. Watts and kill him nearby his own grave.
All very well and said, Mr. Holmes. While this manservant of Mr. Sallow fits the description of the killer and fits the motivations as you've laid them out, the case still lacks indisputable evidence.
Holmes quickly checks his pocket watch. It is more than the aboriginal manservant's size and strength of 6 foot 8 inches and over 300 pounds that condemns him. We have Mr. Watts himself to thank for placing Mr. Pete at the scene of the crime. For the footprints leaving Bunhill burial grounds showed the right imprint twice as deep as the left. Not from a man carrying off a heavy item, as Wiggins first surmised, but from the shifting of one's weight off an injured leg. The left leg, which received a maiming blow from a shovel at Mr. Watts's discretion, breaking the tool in two, yet not incapacitating his attacker. Keep in mind, gentlemen, there was no mention of a giant using a cane at the train station, nor at Mr. Watts's residence. No, I'm certain after medical examination you will find the damage to Mr. Pete's leg received on the eve of November 13th, damage consistent with a blow from a shovel. Holmes taps out the ash from his pipe into a white porcelain dish. There you have it, Inspector, and if my watch is correct of the time, you'll find Mr. Ebenezer Sallow and his servant, Peter Pete, seated at the window of this establishment for Ebenezer's afternoon spirit and business gossip of the hour. We all turn to see the men just as Holmes planned. The inspector jumps up.
I'll have them in the yard within the hour. But that Ashmore, there's no evidence against him.
Holmes rises and dons his coat. Afraid not, Inspector. Not unless you get an unlikely confession from Mr. Sallow. It seems as though the Hellfire Club escapes the irons once again. A wily bunch working from the shadows, expertly manipulating others to do their dirty work. I'd double the eyes on that bunch if I were you. Outside the pub, we step out into the street and flag down a carriage. Behind us, a scuffle of men descends on Sallow and his manservant. The Australian doesn't take kindly to being arrested and puts down 3 constables before being finally subdued.
Okay, I got 2 questions wrong. Who was the killer acting on behalf of? Ebenezer Sallow. And Mr. Watts tried to use it to defend himself. But I got the other ones right. I'm surprised. I don't know how you were supposed to know. It would be nice too if you could see if there was more clues. Because the thing that they mentioned about him using it to hit the assailant, and then him limping on the 13th and whatnot, that made it a little bit that seemed like a little bit hard to come by. I think it would have been better in the story if they had mentioned, like, you know, how long have you been using this cane? Or if there was some way for you to like truly investigate people, because then he also mentioned the guy's size. And he was like, I think he said he was 6'6" or something like that, over 300 pounds. I know that wasn't in the story. So they just came up with that in the solution. The only thing in the story was that he was just a large man. So I don't know if I would have been able to know that he used it. I know it has blood on the handle, but there was nothing to say that he hit his attacker or anything like that, unless I missed a chapter or there was an additional chapter. I got who the killer acting on behalf of. Okay, so that's Sherlock Mysteries. I did like this game. I could definitely see myself playing another case. If you want to see me play more, like, comment, subscribe, all those good things, and I'll play another case. But yeah, it was very interesting, and I can't believe that was just a beginner case. So I wonder if the other cases are longer, or if they're like the same length. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed that. I just proved that I am no Sherlock Holmes. But I thank you for watching. Remember, God loves you, and so do I. And I'll see you next time.